Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I know that we were supposed to do the traditional masterclass, and we may still do that, but today I'm going to do a special little presentation. I'm going to take a bit of personal privilege, and I want to talk to you about a famous soprano who last year she unfortunately she left us, Carmen Balthrop. Some of you, I have talked to you before about the fact that aside from me teaching and performing and being a church musician, I explore this side of myself as being an arts journalist. And this has opened the door for me to meet countless artists. And Carmen Balthrop was one of them. So I want to just talk a little bit about her today and talk to you a little bit about her legacy. So I have this PowerPoint here, forgive the small screen, but you have to do what you have to do. So Carmen Balthrop, as I mentioned, she passed last year, stellar soprano. And I don't know if you all remember when Dr. Harden was making her presentation, she mentioned an opera called Treemonisha by Scott Joplin. Carmen Balthrop was perhaps the definitive Treemonisha because she debuted in that opera actually on Broadway. So I am going to go ahead and continue here. So again, who is Carmen Balthrop? She was born in Maryland in 1948, and she's considered one of the world's greatest sopranos, and she sang major operatic roles. But I would say the main role that really, or the main event that really catapulted her career was when she actually won the Metropolitan Opera Council auditions. Who could tell me where is the Metropolitan Opera? New York City, Savannah. Thank you so much. New York City. So that's a big deal. If you're an opera singer, that is like the creme de la creme, the pinnacle of excellence when you make your debut at the Metropolitan Opera. So actually, after she won the council auditions, it was in 1977, the year I was born. 1977, she made her Metropolitan Opera debut as Pamina in Mozart's opera, The Magic Flute. So I'm gonna go ahead and go on from there. So this is just a list of some of her major operatic roles, and you can see them there. So she's singing, you have all the characters, but Madama Butterfly, La Traviata, Carmen, Turandot, Don Giovanni, The Coronation of Pompeia by Monteverdi. Now, this opera was groundbreaking because Monteverdi, can anybody tell me what period of music is Monteverdi other than Savannah? Anybody? One. Monteverdi. Not quite. A little earlier. So actually, let's back up. So actually, you're correct. So Monteverdi, yes, Baroque. So the Coronation of Pompeii by Monteverdi. And so this is an early Baroque opera, and she was already performing this repertoire. So now people perform a lot of early music. They want to create this kind of music in different ways. But now, this is something she was already doing before it was vogue. And then, of course, you have other operas by Carlisle Floyd, Scott Joplin, Treemonisha we just mentioned, and also this opera by William Grant Still. So I want to talk to you about this. You all see the picture on the screen? Okay. So I want to talk to you all. How you doing? I want to talk to you all about this chance meeting that I had with Ms. Balthrop. So what happened was, this is when I first started trying to make my way into being an arts journalist and covering these stories. You have to make all the connections. I really didn't know how to do it. I just, was out operating on a whim. And so it just so happens that I got some press tickets to the NEA Opera Honors. Does anybody know what NEA stands for? NEA? The basement, ground floor. Mm-hmm. So NEA is the National Endowment of the Arts. It's the big supporter of the arts. And that's the organization that we really look for all of our support from this organization. But anyway, National Endowment of the Arts, NEA Opera Honors. So this is what happened. I by chance got these tickets to go to this event. Now, I wasn't on the list. You know, there's always a list for everything. There was a guest list for this big fancy reception after, and I wasn't on the list. And mind you, I had just started, beginning this career, trying to be an arts journalist and all that. You know, I didn't really know. I was new to Washington at this point. And so what happened was I actually had a follower. There was a woman who worked with Washington National Opera. She was already following me. She admired my work. And then when she happened to see me in passing, she was like, "You're Patrick McCoy." And value had just started. She was, and I was, I saw the little reception. Value, I wasn't on the list. And she said, "No, come, come, come." So she invited me to this reception at the Kennedy Center. I thought I was just, I was over the moon. So I went to this reception. You saw all these different people, and all the other honorees were there also. But I was walking, around, and I saw all the honorees. Ms. Barker wasn't honored this time, but of course she's a legendary singer. She was in the midst, and that's why she was there in that space. So I was just walking around, walking around. But I said, "What?" I said, I was starstruck. I said, "That's Miss Baltimore." I had never met her in person or had that close audience. And the gentleman beside her, ironically, is her husband, Patrick Delaney. So I met her, and she's a very reserved woman when she doesn't know you. Like most people, they have to feel you out. And of course, I'm this strange person walking, "Oh my God, Cory Baltimore." So she was very gracious, and we took this photo. And so that has really, continued our relationship from that point. So of course, she not only was a great performer, she was a distinguished teacher. She taught for many years at the University of Maryland at College Park. She was the chair of the voice department. And so I got to hear her several times in recital. She was known for her operatic roles, but I personally think that her recital singing was kind of her niche area. She was excellent at that. And you all know, and you'll be able, at some point, you will present your own recitals. It takes a lot to present a solo recital. Savannah, who's visiting with us, Savannah Daniels, she's an alumna of the music department, graduated with her master's from Norfolk State University. We won't hold that against her, but I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Savannah sang in the choir under my direction when she was here. And you studied with Miss Edmonds? Yes, studied with the great Mrs. Edmonds. Yeah, so when you sing a recital, you can't really hide. Don't get me wrong, opera is wonderful, but the recital, you don't have the luxury of hiding behind scenery or movement. It's more of a kind of stoic, for lack of better words, presentations, but you have to really be able to emote and communicate through the music. And that's why I always tell you, when you get a piece of music, what do you need to do? You need to read through the text. You need to know the context of where does it come from, what happens before and after, so you can really be able to be authentic in your performance. So Ms. Baltham, she was definitely that. She was a wonderful recitalist. And as I mentioned before her passing, she was the chair of music at the University of Maryland at College Park. So this was a personal highlight for me. As I mentioned, I had ventured out trying to pursue this career as being a music journalist. And you know how sometimes people tell you that you have to go through all these steps to achieve what you need to achieve. For example, let's say that Tamari was a famous singer, like the Beyonce of Virginia State, for lack of better words, or a person. And you wanted to interview her. What do you think that you would probably have to do? Do you think you would be able to go right to her and but I would like to beg to differ on that, because I had to realize to myself, I didn't have any help. I didn't know any contacts, and I didn't have anyone to steer me. So I used to just go ahead and, I would do the research, find the contact people, send the email. You don't know until you ask. So I found Ms. Baltner's email, and I just emailed her directly. I didn't go through a manager. publicists, any of those extra layers that that society would dictate you go. And I'm not saying the buck protocol. There is protocol, but in my instance, I really didn't know, and I'm kind of glad I didn't know because I just went ahead and stepped out on faith and really made the entree to go ahead and interview her. So I read this was back in 2011. I started doing a podcast called Across the Arts. And I started reaching out to all of these different people. And so I started having these series. And one series that I launched, it was called the Opera Diva series. So it focused on, excellent women singers. And I've interviewed several. And Carmen Balter was the first interview on that series. So I reached out to her, she agreed. And so what I want to do is, I've talked enough. I want to play an excerpt of Ms. Balter singing. I think I went too far here. Let me stop here. And I won't play all of this, but just give you an idea of this great woman's talent. Can you all see the YouTube screen? Oh, perfect. but I hope that gave you a little idea of her talent. And I know that it is almost disappointing, you know, when you think about, especially your female opera singers, you probably would automatically say Mary Anderson or Jesse Norman or Kathleen Battle, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that Carmen Balthorp's name should definitely be readily, you know, um, evoked the same kind of way because she was a great talent. So I'm gonna go back to my PowerPoint here. Was the PowerPoint showing on the screen? Okay. So you may have seen this picture in my office. If you go in my office, it's hanging on this wall here. So, and I have a few points I want to make about this photo. The lady who is on the right in the multicolored dress, that woman, oh my God, I can't speak enough about her. That is Mrs. Mame Wilkins Holt. She's the reason why I ended up in DC. And this is a whole story right here. And because I want to impress upon you that, yes, you're here for a music degree. You came here to sing or play an instrument, or whatever the case may be. But you never know where life is going to take you with these degrees, especially in the arts. I just want to be very clear about that. The arts is one of those precarious kind of art forms. What did we talk about the last time? You do it because you love it. It's not necessarily because of the money or the fame. Now, don't get me wrong. Both of those things are great. But this situation right here, when I finished Shenandoah, when I finished my master's, I moved back to Petersburg. That was the first time I moved back after I was living away. So I moved back to Petersburg and I was working at, of all places, Capital One. I was working in the retention department. So that's where you would have to call the people and the person on the other line say, close my account, close my account. So I had to memorize this statement: per your request, we've designated this account to close. Please destroy all cards and access checks associated with this account. And at the end of this call, you will receive a printed note, such and such and such. You had to get this whole spiel. The person's cussing you out all the while. So I was working at Capital One. But this one day, it was definitely divine intervention because I was on my way on 95 back home to Petersburg. And I got this call. Now imagine the cell phone was probably, I would say probably as big as this book. It was an exaggeration. It was a big, huge thing. It wasn't, the cell phone wasn't all streamlined like this. It was a big block. But I'll never forget, I was in my car on my way home and I got this phone call. Now, you know, now you can screen your calls and you can avoid calls. But back in the day, if somebody called, you just pick up the phone. And so that's what I did. And I'm so glad I did because I heard this little sweet voice. The person said, hello, may I speak to Mr. McCoy? And I said, speaking. She said, this is Mame Holt. And I thought about it before I said anything. I said, wait a minute. I said, Mame Holt as in Ben Holt. And she said, yes, that was my son. So Ben Holt was a famous Black legendary baritone, and that was her son. And if I show you a picture of him and this picture of her, I mean, you can just tell that, she basically spit him out. But this is Ben Holt's mother, and she has supported countless artists. And because of her association in the opera world, because of Ben following all of his concerts, all of his performances, of course, she encountered all of his peers, and Carmen Balthorp was one of them. So, at this time, as I mentioned, I moved back to Petersburg, and she was the head of the music committee at this church in Washington, D.C. called Tacoma Park Baptist Church. That was my first church job when I moved away. I used to play for a Presbyterian church in Petersburg, but then when I finished graduate school, I did that for a little bit longer. But this opportunity came when she called, for this job at Tacoma. She was the chair of the music department. And so she invited me, to come to Washington, and the rest is history. I moved to Washington. I took the job. And then I also got a job in conjunction with that, teaching. And let me talk about that. I think I mentioned this before. I was a performance major when I was here at GC. I was not education, I was performance. And when you are a performance major, just to put a footnote in that, when you are a performance major, you do 2 recitals. And so my initial goal was not necessarily to be a teacher when I left here. But I think I already told you all the story about my mother, how she introduced me to my former principal, and I ended up getting the job teaching. And then I taught in Petersburg for 3 years. And then I said, okay, well, I did it before. Now, the point that I'm making with that is that when you have a performance degree, yeah, you can get a job teaching, but a lot of times what they would do, they say, hey, I'll give you a provisional degree, meaning that they'll give you X amount of time to get the education classes in line. But guess what happens if you don't get them in line? So you lose the license, you don't get that permanent license. And so what happened was I did teach, I did that in Petersburg. That was a bad decision. I let the time lapse and I didn't do the classes, but I moved to Maryland, so I was able to get me a job teaching. So I did. So I had the church job in DC, and I also taught. But I'm just gonna be very transparent. I was not necessarily fulfilled teaching public school music because I knew that I wanted to be more in the mix of, and I think you all have observed my personality enough now to know I like to be in the mix of things. And I really wanted to see, more like the inner workings of the performing arts arena, especially being in DC. I love my hometown. I love Petersburg, but DC is definitely an arts capital. You have the Kennedy Center, you have Strathmore, you have all the Forest Theater, Constitution Hall, all these major bastions of art, bastions of music. And so when I was teaching, I was like, well, I want to be a part of that. And so I just made a conscious decision. Well, no, I didn't. Let me just be real with you. So I told you that in Petersburg, I made that decision, that bad decision where I didn't follow through on the education courses. Now, when I moved to Maryland, I did the same thing. I got caught up in, I have a full-time salary, and I didn't follow through. And so then I ended up, doing some substitute teaching. But it was a blessing because sometimes adverse situations will set you up, for your blessing. And so what happened was, my income changed and I had to make some changes. I had this expensive apartment, then I had to end up, renting a room and things like that. So you also will find out as you mature that when you don't have certain things, you don't have certain friends. People will stop being around you because you don't have the things that initially, that they were drawn to. You might have had a car, you might have been picking them up. You might have had a place where they could come and, relax and chill and things like that. But when it's said and done, when you don't have those things, those are kind of, I guess, minuses in the situation. So I had more time on my hands. I didn't have the friends, I didn't have the distractions. And that's where my writing began to blossom. So then I had all that time on my hands, I was able to concentrate on the writing. And that's how I was really had time to start, hey, really strategically thinking, hey, I want to connect with this person, I want to do this, I want to do that. And that's how the writing really matured. But in addition to that, or rather alongside of that, I had my church work. Mrs. Hope, going back to Mrs. Hope, the lady with this resplendent multicolored dress on, classy lady. As I mentioned, her son was Ben Hope, famous opera singer. He died very young. He died of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma at the age of 34. He was very young. So you imagine he probably would have been in his early 60s now. He was a very young man, but he packed it in. And I would just encourage you, like somebody said this to me so many times last week, and it seems like tomorrow's not promised. Do whatever it is that you want to do, pack it in. This man packed it in. I mean, he was 34, but when she showed me his scrapbooks and all the concerts and all the recordings, I was like, wow, 34. I only imagine what I was doing at 34, not even a glimpse of what he was doing. But because of her, her influence, when I came to Washington, as I mentioned, I was new. And she went to all of the concerts. She was on like all of the boards, and she contributed and supported a lot of the major organizations. And so it was because of her that I really got entree into the whole Washington, D.C. art scene. And, of course, because of her and because of her relationship with Ms. Balthrop, of course, she allowed me to call her Carmen, even though I always had a problem with calling people much older than me by their first name, but she always insisted. And so I did know Carmen. And this picture was taken a few years ago. It's an organization that I would love for you all to consider being a part of. It's called the Coalition for African Americans in the Performing Arts. And the whole mission is to bring color to the classics. Because a lot of times when you go to these classical music settings, it's not a whole lot of us there. You might have one, or you might have one or two, or whatever the case may be. You might have somebody in the orchestra, you might. But for the most part, it's a glaring, fact that it's not a whole lot of persons of color that are at these concerts. So this organization, their whole mission is to bring color to the classics. And so this was a reception actually honoring Ms. Balthrop. She was actually honored by the Coalition for African Americans in the Performing Arts. And this picture that you see on the screen is of myself with Ms. Balthrop and Mame Holt, Mrs. Mame Holt. I can't say enough about Mrs. Holt. I mean, she's not living in Washington right now. She's living away. Because Ms. Holt is 99 years old now, and just still beautiful. But she really she's the epitome of a supporter. And I'm sure that you all have your parents. I hope that your parents, support you. And the reason I say that, because Mrs. Holt, I mean, she was definitely like her son's biggest fan. I mean, even though he's no longer here, his legacy continues. She wrote a book about Ben Holt. It's in my office. I'll show it to you. I wish I would have had more things readily available, but Mrs. Holt, again, she was really the conduit that allowed me to really navigate the whole DC art scene. And that's how I really began to really have a close association with Ms. Balthrop. Now, one thing I would say is once you get to this pinnacle, it's important that you give back and support. That's very important. I feel like me coming home, and most of you all know, after being away from Petersburg for the last 14 years, I'm back home. And I'm so happy. Like when you walk in my office, yeah, you see the pictures around the wall, but to me, it's a testament of everything that formed me, because you look at that wall, you see every aspect of my journey, from me here, being here at Virginia State, my church, my family, all of that, is there. So I said all that to say that when you get to a certain point, it's very important that you make an effort to give back. And I'm not saying you have to go and do astronomical things out of your reach, but there's somebody watching. There's always somebody watching, always. You think that somebody is not looking at you or looking up to you, but they are. But the reason I'm on that vein with this is this picture here, the young lady in the center, that's Janae Bridges. This is when Janae, and let me talk a little bit about Janae. She is probably the foremost mezzo. Yes, I did. Yup, y'all did exactly. So I did a presentation on her, a full presentation just on her. But Janae is amazing. I first met her when I started writing seriously, and I would get more entree to these events. And Janae was in this conservatory project program where they basically, like, if you're a person like at the conservatory, they give you all these opportunities at different performance venues. And she was at the Kennedy Center doing a series of recitals. So that's where I first met her. She actually reached out to me and asked me, would I cover or come to one of her recitals. But as time progressed, her star really began to shine. And this is when she won the Marian Anderson Award, the 2012 Marian Anderson Award. So of course, named after Marian Anderson. And what happens is once you win that award, it culminates in this big debut recital at the Kennedy Center. So this picture is after her debut recital I took. This is with Ms. Balthrop, Patrick Delaney, her husband, Ms. Balthrop's husband, Patrick, and then of course Janae, and the pianist is Bradley Moore, wonderful pianist. But this was an amazing evening of music, and it's like, I was like, wow, I remember when she was just really on the journey, and to see her like almost like at the top. And the pandemic, let's talk about the pandemic. I'm gonna fast forward a little bit. Pandemic, before the pandemic, I had a really heavy schedule. I was really covering a lot of arts events. And as you know, when COVID came, it just knocked everything out. I mean, from schools, church, you name it. So Janae was scheduled, well, she actually made this, well, she made her debut, her Washington National Opera debut as Delilah in Samson and Delilah. She sang, maybe I want to say maybe one or two performances, but then the whole run got canceled because of COVID. She was also scheduled that same season to sing her debut of Carmen, I want to say, at the Metropolitan Opera. That was like the big moment. That got canceled. She had already sung at the Met before in a modern opera called Anacton, but Carmen was her thing. And if you think about Carmen, probably the most, I would say so, probably the most famous Carmen, I would say from DC, is Denyce Graves. I don't know if y'all have ever heard of Denyce Graves, but Denyce Graves is from DC, and she really is like the Carmen, or she was when she was really singing that role. So she's like a mentor to Janae. So it was like real kind of full circle. But hopefully, actually, Janae just made a debut in Italy at a big opera house as Carmen. But I'm saying all that to say, as it relates to Miss Balthrop, here you have this legendary singer, but she still took time to give back. And I think that's very important, that once you reach a certain level, that you do reach back and pull somebody, with you. So that was that moment there. And there's a link there. I'll share it now. If you probably see the hyperlink there, I won't go to it now, but that's when I actually was writing for Washington Life magazine, and I covered this whole recital. So I'm gonna go on here. Now, this was a funny moment. It was funny and not so funny. So the caption says, support a special friend. So the young lady who is now Dr. Makita Hampton, at the time she was a doctor, we were all young. We were all young. So back in the day, I don't know if you all remember Yahoo. So back in the day, the big thing was Yahoo. There was no Facebook, any of that. It was Yahoo. If you wanted to chat with people, you would get on Yahoo and join all these different groups. So if you don't know, most people know that I am a diehard Kathleen Battle fan. That is my favorite, absolute favorite opera singer. She can do no wrong. I don't care how many stories I hear. I don't care what you tell me. I don't care. But I don't. So this concert right here, Miss Battle, as I always refer to her, Miss Battle, she did a 2007 recital. It was a Christmas recital at the Kennedy Center. And so there used to be a Kathleen Battle Yahoo group. We would come from all over the country. We would follow her to all her recitals, New York, you name it. And if we didn't go, like say if this person went to one, somebody else would share about the experience they had. We had pictures and everything. I mean, it was a big deal. Now that group is on Facebook. It's not kind of like the same because you lost some of the members in the transition. But I'm saying that to say, I had this caption, support special friends, because Kathleen Battle and Carmen Balthrop, they were great friends. And, Ms. Battle would come to Washington, to support Ms. Balthrop's recitals and vice versa. So on this occasion, this was a Christmas concert at the Kennedy Center. And this is funny. Now I wasn't quite on the list and didn't have the access that I have now. So we were at this recital, and after the recital, if you go to most major music halls, they have a stage door. You just can't walk up in there like you own the place. It's like a security guard and a list a stage list of who is supposed to be back there. And if you're not on the list, I mean, you're not on the list, and generally speaking, they're not gonna let you back there. So on this occasion, this is actually like right outside the little security, desk at the stage door. We were, Makita and I and a few other friends, we were waiting for Miss Battle because sometimes they're not gonna let you back there. So what will happen is, everybody just congregate in the stage door and we just pray, or we pray. They just come out, pray, pray, pray. Then they come out the stage door. And so we were there waiting, and Miss Balthrop walked up. Of course, we knew she was, because we're in the, sometimes the security guards at these venues, they're not going to know classical music artists. I want you all to know that we're in a sphere over here somewhere. They will know like a popular artist, but generally speaking, classical music people, they don't readily recognize them. So, I mean, yeah, they don't. So with Ms. Balthrop, I was like, oh my God, that's Carmen Balthrop. And she was there. Her name was supposed to be on that list to go backstage to see Miss Battle. And so when she went up to the security guard, but she was not a diva about it at all. Her name was not on the list. She tried to get back there. The security guard said, oh, you're not on the list. She just left it at that. But we made a stink. I'm like, oh my God, you don't know who she is? That's Miss Balthrop. I mean, don't you understand? She's Miss Battle's good friend. She's here to see her. And they were like, well, I'm sorry, she's on the list. So luckily, Miss Battle came out, and then they hugged and she greeted her and all that. And even Miss Battle was not, untoward or anything either. They just let it, and she didn't make a big deal about it. But that was a kind of a special moment. Like, you don't have to be on the list, but you are on the list. Okay. So that was a special moment. But I want to say a little bit about Makita. So Makita is a very talented soprano. And as I mentioned in this picture, she was not Dr. Hampton, but she's finished her doctorate since then, and she's teaching, on the college level and so forth. I'm so proud of her, but that was a special moment there. And so, of course, just to close, as I mentioned, I just really think that Ms. Balthrop, her name should really be, when you think about those great opera singers, it's like readily available. Like you think about Jessie Norman, you think about Kathleen Ballard, you think about Leona Mitchell, Martina. I mean, I think her name should just really be in that space. Because she certainly leaves behind a legacy. She had a great career. And Dr. Hart, I was mentioning, you had mentioned Tremonisha not too long ago. And of course, I was sharing with them that Carmen Balthrop was definitely considered like the definitive Tremonisha. And they've tried to revive Tremonisha on several occasions. A performance. I haven't heard much. I know that it actually was I want to say it was like a Canadian opera company. They were trying to do it like recently, but I never heard anything more about it. But I was always pushing. I was like, you all need to talk to Miss Balthrop. She's like the expert on this opera. But she certainly was a wonderful person. But I want to go back to a story that I didn't have a chance to share. Miss Balthrop, she was a very private person. Most of us are private to a certain degree. Like when you're in a space, you let your guard down, you talk to people and so forth, when you feel comfortable. So on this occasion, I share with you, Miss Balthrop's husband, Patrick, is from the Bahamas. And he's still well connected to the Bahamas. And when I used to be the organist choir master at Trinity Church in Washington, D.C., this professional choir called Bel Canto, directed by Eldridge McPhee, they came to Washington, and I arranged it so they were able to sing at Trinity Church as a part of our fine art series at the time. But what happened was, what special moment happened with this is Ms. Balthrop hosted a dinner party at her home. And before that, they went to the embassy and all of that. And the ambassador for Bahamas was at the concert at the church. But Ms. Balthrop, she hosted a dinner party at her home. And you know how sometimes we like to be late. We like to make an arrival. And I won't use the acronym that we say because it might not be politically correct. But anyway, you know what I'm saying. We like to be late. And we think that we're going to make an entrance and all this. So Ms. Balthrop hosted this dinner party at her home, and I was not driving at the time. So I had to depend on public transportation. I took the train, and then I had to take like a taxi or something to her house. But that doesn't matter. Late is late. and I was late. I got to her home late, and I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe I'll get there and they might be talking, but it was a formal dinner. It was like they had already had like, hors d'oeuvres and champagne and stuff. It was that kind of level thing. And it was a seated dinner. So after all of that happened, it was a seated dinner and they were already seated and I got there late. It was cringe worthy. So when I got there, I had to basically tuck my tail. I apologize for being late, but she was still gracious, and but she did, in her way, let me know, "Hey, you're late," and I sat down and everything, and it was a great, and members of the choir, the conductor, all that, they were there at the dinner, so it warmed up, and I was spared, but I was thankful. But the special moment was, as I mentioned, Ms. Bartlett, I played the recording, but that recording, if you ever get a chance, I interviewed Ms. Bartlett on my podcast, the Opera Diva series. And so that was a different level because, she was on the phone, I was on the other end, so you didn't have any contact. But this time I'm in her home. And she knows I'm on Facebook. Anybody know me, I love social media. I really do. I love it. Instagram, all of that. I just started with TikTok, but we won't go to TikTok just yet. So anyway, Ms. Bartha, she actually cooked this meal. It was not catered. She cooked the meal, and she was an excellent cook. So it just so happened that it was a moment where she and I ended up being alone. She was still tending to stuff, that was like on the stove and, that kind of thing. And I was sitting down at the little table that was in the kitchen. And she said, "Patrick," she said, "you're in my inner sanctum now." She said, "But I don't do social media." She said, "You can ask me anything you want to do, but don't post my house on no Facebook." And so I have just let that moment live in my head. But we talked, and it was just a wonderful evening, that I spent with her and Patrick. And it so happened I ended up being the last guest. And the thing that really, really endeared me to her there, I feel like I was like an associate at this point, but I think it progressed further because, the train stops at a certain hour. So we ended up talking to the point that I missed the last train. And she and her husband drove me home. They did. They drove me home. I was like, wait a minute. But that was a special moment. So I just want to close by saying that, Ms. Balter was a very special person, deeply missed. I had the chance to go to her funeral. It was glorious. And this is like when the pandemic was kind of still, that church was packed. Her funeral was at this big Catholic church called Immaculate Conception in DC. As I mentioned, she taught in the faculty at University of Maryland. So the University of Maryland choir sang. Dr. Edward McClary, he conducted the choir. They had like an orchestra, and somebody played like a big prelude. It was organ. It was it was definitely what we call it, like high church. It was very solemn, but the music, they had this whole extended, prelude, and the church was packed. And I was honored to be there. And I meant to break the program, but I was rushing, and maybe I'll show it to you. But it was like, you looked at this program, it wasn't like a funeral program. It was truly like a depiction of a life, well lived. So I just wanted to mark Ms. Bartha, the first anniversary of her passing. She leaves behind two daughters, her husband, and grandchildren. And the very last time that I saw her was actually right before the pandemic in 2019. There was another famous soprano that I feel like doesn't get the recognition. If you ever Google her, glorious voice, and that's Leona Mitchell. Leona Mitchell sang a recital at the University of Maryland in Baltimore. And I went to that recital, and of course, Ms. Balter was there. She was there with her grandchildren, and we spoke and greeted the grandchildren. But if you get a chance, please, look up Ms. Balthrop and just make sure that her legacy lives on. Thank you.